Peace be with you. Dear friends, welcome to Living Clay Podcast website and Facebook group. Gospel Reflections for Tuesday in the 18th week in the Ordinary Time. Gospel according to Matthew chapter 14 verses 22 to 36. Jesus, after he had fed the people, made the disciples to get into the boat and precede him to the other side of the sea, while he dismissed the crowds. Well, after doing so, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Prayer was a very important activity in the life of Jesus. We find him praying always. It is not only when he was alone, before performing a miracle, or perhaps even while preaching. Some of the preachings of Jesus we find where he mentions the Father. He always invoked the Father. He was always in communion with the Father. Then we find when it was evening, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles offshore, was being tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. The disciples were in trouble. They were stranded. The wind was strong. The boat was tossed. Well, we are actually reading the Gospel of Matthew, who always had this idea in mind, because these Gospels were written after so many years of the ascension of our blessed Lord into heaven, when the disciples were sent to preach the good news, to baptize people in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, to proclaim the good news, to evangelize. And they remembered and wrote these Gospels. We know Matthew was specifically writing his Gospel to the Jewish people, to the Jewish converts to Christianity, to be the followers of Christ. And in the early church we know how the small community of Jews converted to Christianity was so vulnerable. Practically, Matthew visualizes the early church and compares it to a boat tossed about by the waves. Now, this small group of apostles and followers of Christ were feeling difficulties, and they were being criticized, persecuted, some were martyred. You can just imagine the plight of these people. Some were saying that Jesus would come again. Others needed strength. Others needed hope. So Matthew was in some way thinking about this small group among all those Jewish people, in some way terrorized, fear-filled. But then they were from time to time strengthened by their prayer and coming together. Now this boat symbolizes them. They were tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. Well, the political wind was against the followers of Christ. The Jewish people who were die-hard followers of the law of Moses were against them. And probably the followers of Jesus were finding it so difficult to live the teaching of Christ. At once Jesus appears there walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. At once Jesus spoke to them. He said, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." This is a particular saying or slogan very much used by Pope John Paul II, now Saint John Paul II. Do not be afraid. Dear friends, in this world, we need to be courageous. And what is this courage? This courage must help us to be the disciples of Christ, followers of Christ. We are also tossed about by the waves of this modern world. Sometimes we know that we cannot live our faith. It is so difficult on certain situations. Some of you who are living in countries where there is no freedom to practice your faith and religion. We are all tossed about by the waves because the winds are strong against us. But Jesus says, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." When Jesus is with us, who can be against us? We can always say the words of Peter, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on this political situation, come to you on this world of uncertainties, to come to you in this world of violence and war, to come to you in the situation where I cannot find any reason as to live a life with faith, with hope, with charity. Well, Jesus says, "Come." And immediately we know that Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water towards Jesus. And then he started doubting. He became frightened, beginning to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Dear friends, we need to cry out to the Lord always, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus will stretch out his hand and will catch us. And perhaps he will say, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" On this day, let us meditate on this gospel passage. Try to get strength from Jesus. When we are with Jesus, when we cry out for help, He will certainly extend His hand and will tell us, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." God bless you.